One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So the plan today, we are going to paint this mercenary sci-fi figure from Reaper Miniatures. I was messing around with one earlier. That's the sort of general idea that we're going for today. The one I'm actually going to paint is this one. This is intended to go into a little diorama I'm working on later. Alright, so I'm going to keep it pretty basic today. Start getting the paints loaded up. So for my black today, I'm going to use Dragon Black. But again, as usual, it doesn't really matter what paint you use. We're going to do a lot of paint mixing, and we keep it pretty simple. So my black today is Dragon Black, and I'm going to try to keep like the blue is in black for the armor and for the weapon at the top. I'm going to do the ochre and kind of pale colors for the cloth across the middle, and I'll do the skin tone across the bottom on the palette. This is Reaper Twilight Blue, and we're going to use this to highlight the black as well as to do some of the work on her gun. And I'm going to use Snow Shadow for some of the highlighting. And we will need a little bit of pure white, or it doesn't really matter, some kind of cold white. I'm using solid white, and I'm also going to use some Reaper Stone Gray on the gun. I haven't really finalized that in my head yet, but that's the sort of general plan. Then for the clothing, she's got these like combat pants, and we're going to do her sweater up like it's British Army style wool sweater. And I'm going to use this khaki sort of ochre color for most of that, and this is also going to be the color for her combat pants. I'm going to highlight it with creamy ivory, and I'm going to shade it with burgundy wine. But you can use pretty much any warm white for the highlighting and any sort of darker red-brown sort of color or red-violet sort of color for the shading on the cloth. For the skin tone, my main skin tone is going to be Reaper's Rosy Skin. And I'm going to mix a whole bunch of burgundy wine for the skin tones down here. And I'm going to use the creamy ivory as well for the skin tones. And the final thing I'm going to use, I'm not 100% sure how I want to do this yet, but I'm going to use some pink. Just going to get a fancy pink helmet and a few like pink badges and things like that. This is Reaper's Breast Cancer Awareness Pink, but you could use pale violet red or runic glow or any of those kinds of colors to do the same effect. Alright, let's go back to the mini. There she is. And now we can get started with painting. We need a good brush here. Use this size one. So the thing I'm going to start with is getting a base coat on all the clothing. Just got to open up the camera focus here. Make sure we have a nice sharp looking shot there. Alright. So the first color I'm going to be putting on is I'm going to paint a lot of her small details, like the parts around the helmet, her little radio, her sweater, and all these armor plates, and her belt, these little armor plates, and the boots. These are all going to be black. And the reason for that is I want them to be like, the black plates are going to be like black armor plates. It'll be easier to paint the armor plates if we just paint the whole thing black, and then we're going to highlight with the khaki color to get the sweater color. And it's easier to get a nice dark leather color if we start with black boots. So that's the plan. So I'm going to start on the boots, and you'll notice I'm not thinning the paint with water or anything like that. I'm just using the paint straight. But what I am doing is carefully loading the brush so I don't have too much paint on the brush. And when I start putting the paint on, I work it so that the layer of paint that goes on ends up being relatively thin. That means that it'll dry quickly, and it won't fill in various details. It's going to look like a nice solid base coat of color. The other way you could do this would be to thin it slightly with water, and then put on two very thin coats, or relatively thin coats, to get the same sort of look. But that takes longer to dry. And for these videos, for these paint-alongs, I'm trying to be a little bit efficient about it. As we go along, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to unmute your mic and ask the questions. I know we've got people watching both on just one person on the Discord right now, but there's a few people watching on the Twitch stream. I probably won't notice if you put something in the chat on the Twitch stream, but if you do want to ask a question, just come on over to the Discord, and be happy to answer any questions as we go. So we did the boot, so now I'm focusing on the jacket, the sweater, I should say, and the armor plates on the jacket. I'm going to call it a jacket for the rest of the class now, even though I'm planning to paint it as though it's a sweater. So I'm not going to paint the gun black. I've got a different plan for that to make it look different from her clothing. So we're not going to paint that black right now. We're going to end up painting that a dark blue color. So for now, just focus on the sweater, the jumper, the cardigan, whatever you want to call it. But try not to think of it as being a leather jacket or something like that, or a combat jacket, because we're going to turn it into a woolen sweater. So again, the reason that I'm starting with black is so that I'll have really nice dark shadows around all the plates of armor. And I'm painting that base coat first, so it has lots of time to dry before we start painting over it with our khaki color. And hopefully that'll Well, that way it won't pick up the black too much. I'm also painting her belt. All the armor plates. I'm going to actually paint a dark line around the holster with the pistol in it. That's going to be brown leather, but I want to have a nice shadow around it, so I'm going to paint a black line around it right now. Same thing with the butt of the rifle. I want a nice shadow there, so I'm going to paint a line around that now. These little straps on her legs are the straps for the holsters. One for her knife and one's for the pistol. Those are going to be the same brown leather as the holsters. So I'll paint a line around them, but I'm not going to paint them black right now. If you paint them black, it doesn't matter, but they're going to end up being a brown leather color when I'm done. So the idea that I'm looking for today is a lot of these are going to be a lot of the different parts of the miniature are going to be similar colors and sort of neutral gray or brown tones. And by having really dark shadows around each object, it'll help define those objects, make them look separate from the objects around them. So that's what we're going to try to do today. So each of these objects on the helmet, I'm going to paint a black line around them. And then later when we paint them blue or pink or whatever color they end up being, we won't completely cover this black line. And that's going to give us a bit of a contrast boost to make those objects stay visible. Now, quite often the way I do this when I'm painting is I paint those lines last. And I just kind of go around and trace an outline around every object to put in those shadows. But that's really difficult for people that are just starting out. So the aim today is to make this as user-friendly as possible. So we're going to put all these shadows in at the start and try not to cover them up too much. So that's one of the things we're trying to do today. The other thing I want to try to do today is practice making really small brush strokes. So we're going to do quite a few textures today. And that'll help us practice doing very, very tiny brush strokes. The mini that we picked for this class as well has a lot of really small, finely sculpted details. It can be a bit hard to pick out. And I really like this sculpt. It's by a guy named Kev White. And I love the way that he sculpts all kinds of tiny little details, but they stand out really well on the mini, and you can really make some interesting sort of dynamic looking minis as a result with the paint job. I'm going to paint the eye sockets black now as well, and that's because the eyes are so close up under that helmet they can be quite difficult to paint. They're beautifully sculpted, but it takes a little bit of care to reach in there with a brush to paint in the eyes. So we're going to do that pretty much right at the start. And so the black that I'm painting right now is actually the irises. So just filling in the eye socket with black. Now she looks like she's a police officer with black sunglasses under her helmet, but we're going to give her some eyes very shortly. Alright, so that's our base coat of black. The next base coat that I'm going to do, I'm just going to clean my brush a little bit. The tip's getting a bit dry on it. There we go. That twilight blue that I put on there, I'm going to mix just a little bit of black in with that. Oop, I made a big mess. So I just want a blue which is slightly darker than it comes out of the bottle. And that's going to be the base coat that I put on her combat rifle here. So I paint the stock, butt, all of those things this same color. Now most people automatically default to painting guns black, and that's fair. But the way we're going to do it today, we're going to just make it a very dark color. We're going to use a black wash to improve the definition of the various shapes on it. And then we're going to use blue and white to highlight the rifle and make it look like it's sort of a sci-fi high-tech rifle, but that's been kind of dinged up a little bit through use. So there's going to be lots of little shiny dots and spots on it where it's been banged against the wall or dropped, or a magazine missed its housing when it was being slammed in a fight, something like that. And I'm going to make sure that I get nice shadows between her fingers right now. There we go. Sorry, it drifted a little bit on you. Shadows in there. That's what we're looking for. Okay, and I'm going to paint this color on the helmet as well. Now the helmet is going to be a different color later, but I want to have a dark starting point because we're going to make the helmet look kind of chipped up and beat up and that sort of thing. There we go. And I'm going to do a second coat now of the same gray color on the rifle. The reason I'm doing the second coat is there's a lot of very fine details sculpted in the rifle, and the surface tension of the paint kept the paint from going right down into those details. So I'm doing a second coat to make sure I don't end up with little tiny white spots showing deep in the recesses on the rifle. There we go. Oh, and I want to hit the handle of the pistol on her hip with this color as well. Alright, so we're going to give that a minute to dry. The next base coat we're going to do, we're going to put, we're going to paint the leather. So I'm going to grab, I forgot to put this on the palette earlier, some Reaper Harvest Brown. It doesn't matter what sort of brown color. Ooh, that color is disgusting. Just clean that off the palette and start again. I basically didn't shake that enough, and I just got a load of medium on the palette instead of proper paint. So I'll load it up again. There we go. That's better. So this is just like an orangey brown, and it's going to be, I'm going to mix it sort of 50-50 with the burgundy wine, and that's going to be the base coat color for the belt. And for the leather holsters. So this color goes on those straps around her legs. Goes on this holster. So for a brush today, I'm using pretty much a brand new Winsor & Newton Series 7 size 1. I've used this brush a couple of times. Still trying to get it broken in. But, it's not doing too badly so far. And then we'll do the belt. There's a belt buckle there in the middle. You don't have to paint the belt buckle this color. And there's a little bit of the belt showing under the bottom edge of her thing that's going to be a sweater there. Alright, there we go. That's enough of that. Clean the brush off again. And now we are looking for that khaki color that I put in the palette, right in the middle. So I grab a daub at that, move it off to the side. We're going to mix quite a bit with this color. So I'm going to keep that reservoir available to mix with some more later on. Don't want too much paint on the brush, but this is a base coat, so we don't have to be particularly careful about overloading the brush. I'm going to start in along the edge of this rifle, and I'm going to be careful not to cover this color over anything I've already painted. If it covers a little bit, it's okay. This color is actually fairly easy to cover over. But because we did those shadows already, and this color does not cover very well, even if you cover over like an area that's already had the shadow painted, it's not really going to hide that. That shadow is still going to be a little bit visible, and that's kind of helpful. Keep the shadows really strong. Now in my mind, these are like desert tan style combat pants. They're going to be kind of weathered and beat up. Like they're left over for some campaign she was on, or she bought them in the surplus military supply store, army surplus store, whatever. So we're going to put this color on, and then we're going to start mixing burgundy wine with it to make a shadow color. And then we're going to mix the creamy ivory with it to make our highlight color. And then we're going to come back to this color and glaze it on to blend all the highlighting we're going to do with this color. And we might repeat that. We'll see how it goes, but I don't want these to look too smooth. I want them to look a bit more like kind of a beat up old pair of pants. And not particularly clean either, right? Like this particular figure is going to go on a small diorama I've been working on. And it's kind of a space station, a dirty space station environment. So I don't want things to be super clean looking. But that's also why the lighting direction has been set in a very particular way on this mini. The light direction on this is coming from kind of high to her right. That's why the back of the mini is quite a bit darker. This is the shadow direction. This is the light direction. And we'll keep that in mind as we start adding shadows and highlights in a few minutes. That we don't want to... we have to respect that light direction. In this case, it's because this miniature is going to be in an environment which has a very specific lighting direction, and I want it to fit in. If you're just painting a mini for the tabletop, or you're just learning the basics, the light direction is not so critical, but it's always good right from the start to have an idea about the setting that the figure is standing in, the direction that the light is shining from, what kind of light it is. Is it light inside a space station? Is it light coming from a sun, a magic effect, firelight, torchlight? Having that idea in mind while you're painting will help you make good decisions about where to put the highlights and how bright or how light to make those highlights. Alright, there we go. I need to do just a little bit of a retouch in a couple of these spots, not too much. There we go. Starting to look alright, and we're going to let that dry. So now we're moving on to our skin tone. And today what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the burgundy wine. This is kind of the way I usually start now. And mix in some rosy skin tone. And this sort of purpley color is going to be the start of my skin tone. And then I'm going to build it up with the rosy skin and a bit of creamy ivory. I don't know, I haven't really decided exactly how I'm going to do the pink bit, but we might put some pink in there as well. Alright, so I'm starting on this left hand. And I'm going to go kind of carefully, because I've already got quite a lot of the area surrounding that base coated. So I want to make sure I get this color on the fingers, on both sides of the fingers, because they wrap right around the back of the gun. And then we'll do her left hand the same way. Just kind of going slow. Being careful not to make a big mess. I really love this the cast on this metal version of the figure. The bones one is really nice too, but this this pewter mini is just beautiful. And that's the choices of the minis for this class are driven by picking minis that are available both in pewter and in bones, to give as many people as possible the chance to get the minis for the classes and paint along. As we're painting along here, if you feel like you have a question or you just want to post an update photo, you're more than welcome to go for it. Just drop your photos in the chat and I'll have a look. Okay, I'm going to paint this color on her face, but I'm going to be careful not to cover her eyes with this color. I'm not going to try to paint above her eyes. I'm just going to kind of paint up below her eyes and not really cover over the black that I already put on there. And this is going to give me a target for painting her eyes, right? Painting the eyes is a bit easier when you can see the shape of the eye socket, where the cheek starts, and it gives you a place to aim for that first daub of paint that you put in for the eyes. Now I'm not going to paint all the details of the skin at this stage, because I might make a mistake painting the eyes, and I don't want to have to do too much work to fix that. I'll do a little bit of work to fix it, but I don't want to do a lot. So I've just left that bit of a dark oval visible at the top of her cheek. like I was saying before, these eyes are really well sculpted. They're pretty easy to see. And now what I'm going to do is, so that was my base coat. This is going to be the next highlight color. I'm going to take some of that highlight color off to the side. I'm going to mix some creamy ivory into it. And I want this to be quite a light color. And this is going to be the color of the sclera, or the whites of her eyes. So the way I'm going to paint these eyes, you picture a dark oval, and that oval is her eyelashes, her and her iris all rolled into one. And I'm going to paint one daub of pink paint to be the white of her eye, with the irises looking off to our left. Well, that's what it's going to look like when the mini is done here. Let me see if I can zoom in on that for you. There we go. Give you an impression of what that's going to be. Okay, that's what I'm aiming to do. So we get a nice dark iris, nice light sclera, and it's just two little dashes of paint so that it looks like she's looking in the opposite direction. That's what we're aiming to do now. And we haven't really fully painted her face, because if we make a mistake now, it'll be easy to clean up. We just have to paint her eye sockets dark again. And much easier to clean up and not have to worry about it. So, I get the mini oriented to my brush. I want my little dab of paint on an angle like that. So I line up the mini to the brush, reach in with the tip of my sharpest brush, and just touch the eye socket a little bit. Now, I don't know if you can see what's happening here, but I put my brush down, I don't get any paint. That's because in the time that I was talking, the tip of the brush has dried. You can see there's little tiny dried blobs of paint on the tip of the brush. So I got to put it down, clean it up with some water, and I got to come back and very gently remove that dried paint from the tip of the brush. I'm not pulling, I'm just gently running my fingernail along the bristles. I don't want to break any bristles out. I just want to get that little dried bit of paint off the end. Then I'll gently wash it again. I want to just run the brush along the paper towel a little bit, make sure it's not too damp. Because what I really don't want to have happen right now is get a whole flood of water. Because what tends to happen, you go to do the eyes, if you've got a lot of water in the brush, you load it up with regular paint. By the time you get the brush to the eye to paint it, the water has mixed with the paint, the water pushes the paint out, and you get a flood in the eye socket. So just take a little bit of extra time to clean up and dry off the brush before. You want it to be slightly damp but not wet prior to trying to paint the eyes. So I'm going to reload the brush with paint now. Get a nice point on there. I'm not thinning the brush or the paint with water for the exact same reason I just described. Line up the brush to the mini, orient the mini to the brush, and then reach in there and do my little arc of paint. Do the same thing on the other eye socket. Give the impression that she's looking off to her right, which is our left. If you make it too big and it ends up as a big splotch on her cheek, right? Not a big deal. We just come back in and reapply that mix of burgundy wine and rosy skin to tidy things up again before we keep painting the skin tone. Now this is usually the stage where people overbrush. I know I certainly do. Where you get a little bit of paint on there and then you keep working it, you keep brushing it. And this is where you quite often will make the skin tones rough by accidentally lifting up partially dried paint. And when you go in and take your photo and you see, oh my gosh, my Mini has giant chunks of paint lifted out of the skin. It looks horrible. It looks like she's got craters in her face. So one trick that I was taught, actually Elizabeth Beckley from Miniature Monthly showed me this in a painting class. Reaper makes a product called Brush On Sealer, and it's basically acrylic medium. It's a little bit thicker than usual in a bottle. It tends to get kind of crusty, so you want to clean it up before you put it on the palette. And what I'm going to do is take just a little bit of that Brush On Sealer and mix it with this base coat of paint that I've made. Okay, so this area doesn't have Brush On Sealer, this area does. And what's going to happen is when this Brush On Sealer mix dries, it'll dry smooth. And any roughness or irregularities that were there before we started painting, or any that we just created, will get smoothed out by this as it dries. Now you want to be careful with this paint, because if you were to put a very thick layer of this on right now, say over her nose and her mouth, it actually could fill those details in and dry, and you'd have a hard acrylic plastic layer dried across those details. So it will fill in details, but I do find it very helpful for smoothing out skin, particularly on like elven faces or female faces, or young faces where you want the skin to be quite smooth. It works really well. Yeah, one of the advantages of taking classes from the Miniature Monthly people, they know a ton. I was realizing today that I've been a member of the Miniature Monthly Patreon for like something over 4 years, I think. It's been a long time. I love it. They're great to learn from. It's a good painting community. I feel lucky to be part of it. Alright, so that layer is going to take a little bit longer to dry because of the additive we just put in it. Or you might not have had that material or not have needed it, so you might not have done that, but I'm going to let mine dry a little bit longer. And while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to do a wash on the gun. So I want to take a little bit of my black paint, move it off to the side, and I add a couple of drops of water into it to make it quite thin. And I'm going to apply this as a wash over the weapon. So here's how thin the paint is that I'm working with. It's about 3 drops of water for 1 drop of paint. It's quite thin. And the surface tension of the water is going to help kind of move around the black pigment, and you can use it as a wash. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly move the brush across the Mini. And by going slowly, it gives time for the paint to flow off the brush into the low spots, and the brush sort of simultaneously wipes the paint off the raised areas. And that black paint just fills in the low areas as a result. It doesn't work the same if you very quickly pile it on. You end up with a lot of coffee staining and that sort of thing on the raised areas, but if you go slowly, you get a really nice result from that. Give the brush and the paint time to work. Now this is a good place to get a flood. Here's a good fun thing to demo. So I'm going to put an accidental flood of black paint. And the solution to that is you have a second brush which is damp, ready to go. So there's my second brush. And when I put that flood, I can take the second brush, which is damp, and it will lift that wet paint back off the mini into the brush. And I can lift the flood back off. Which is a pretty helpful technique. Especially at the later stages, if you make a flood and you just like cover over half the work you've done, just have that second brush on hand and just lifts the paint right back up into the brush. Alright, we're going to do the back side of that rifle now the same way. Just kind of let the black paint slowly flow into the low areas. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to drift off. There we go. Slowly bring the brush along. And we get quite a nice result from that. That dark gray is starting to look pretty black now. Now, I think it's time to start. We're going to do the sweater effect first. So what I'm going to do is take my ochre color, this sort of khaki. I'm going to grab some of that blue-gray that we made earlier to put on the gun, and I'm going to make a really ugly looking green-gray. This is going to be my first coat on the sweater. So what I'm going to do is basically just make tons and tons of little dot marks. So I'm just going to put dabs and dots of this color everywhere on the sweater except on the armor plate. So there's like a little bit on her elbow, which we could treat that as a patch, or we could treat it as a piece of armor. Maybe that's where my pink will go. We'll treat it as a pink patch that she's put on her elbow of her sweater. So the reason I'm doing dots is because the texture of a wool sweater tends to get sort of picked, and it has little balls of wool that sit on the surface and it looks kind of fuzzy. So that's the effect I'm trying to recreate. The cuff here has little lines on it, so I'm going to put little lines. But then I'm going to go back and keep doing little dots of this color on the sweater. And I don't want to completely cover the black. Okay, I want there to be some shadow in behind all these little dots. And I'm going to treat the bottom ring of the sweater like a cuff. So I'm going to put little lines on it instead of dots. Now these don't have to be perfect. They just have to give the impression of a texture. So they suggest that the texture is lines and dots. They don't have to actually have millions and millions and millions of little dots and lines, just enough to suggest that the texture is there. Right. And then we do the same thing on this, on her left arm. And I'm aiming for sort of the raised areas, like on her bicep, on her left arm. There's some really deep folds in her elbow. I'll avoid filling those in with dots. but everywhere else I want to make a little bit of a dot texture. And it can be a bit of a pain at first to make all the little dots, but once you get used to it, you can do it really, really fast. And this is what I meant about when I was talking about what we were going to do during this class, or the paint along at the start. I said we were going to practice doing lots and lots of little tiny brush strokes, and that's what we're doing right now. And it's a useful skill to have for a lot of things, like painting the eyes, painting freehands, doing textures, painting tiny little details. It's so many places. And it's a different sort of skill from painting blends and beautiful big brush strokes. You have to learn to be precise but quick at the same time, and that I think is the useful thing to practice when you're starting out. So that's why I chose to do that this way today. Plus, I don't know, I think the dirty old British Army wool sweater is going to look good on this mini, on the diorama I'm making when we're done. Alright, there's our first coat of dots. And now I'm going to take some more of that ochre color, khaki color, and mix it in to make another lighter mix. And we're going to do the same thing again, right over top of what we just did. But we're going to try to make areas that look highlighted. So like if you look at her cuff here, the light's going to hit the top of the cuff and the top of her arm here, but it's not going to hit on the inside because the light's coming this way. So we'll focus our dots on the upper area of her arm, a little bit on her chest there where it sticks out under the armor plate. To create a highlight where the light is hitting that cloth. Now, this technique of dots is good practice for eventually painting camouflage patterns, like, you know, that mathematical pattern, urban gray camouflage, or the U.S. Marine Corps camouflage uniform, or any of those mathematically generated camouflage patterns. But because we're doing it on something that we don't really need to have a specific camouflage pattern, it's good practice at the brush stroke that you can use later when you go to put camouflage on something. So now I'm going to keep doing those little strips on the hem to make it look like the hem of a sweater, even though I'm pretty sure this was intended to be like a bomber jacket or a leather jacket or something like that. Alright, there's our little lines. We've done the front, and now we're going to, actually I think a little bit of cloth shows in around her collar. So I'm going to put some dabs of this color in there and pick that out, but I'm not going to paint it over the armor plates that are around her neck. Just a little bit on the collar, above the armor plates on her chest. Yeah, like that. Alright, let's go keep working on the back. So as we look at it from the back, the light is coming from this side. It's coming this way. So I want to hit the top of her arm. The bicep is kind of a little bit bigger. The top of that cuff, where a little bit of light might go through there, close to her elbow. There we go. There's just little folds in the cloth. So I want to get the top of those. There we go. Now we're sort of painting on the dark side, so I don't want to do too much more of that. I'm going to clean that little dried bit of paint off the tip of the brush, though. Fresh up my paint. And on the back of the sweater, light is coming this way, so I'm going to really focus on the right side of her body from our perspective. It's also her right side because we're facing the same way she is. And just keep making lots and lots of little dots to make highlights on that cloth. That pebbly, I think they call it a pill texture on wool. There we go. And sort of the addition of all those little dots bring out the shape. There we go. And I'm going to go one color brighter. So this will be pretty much just straight khaki. So I'll stop using the mix and I'll grab the khaki from down below. Now I don't want this to compete too much with the pants, so really only focusing this on the areas closest to the light. Doesn't need to be everywhere. So top of her arms, the top of her right shoulder facing the light, the top of these little bits of cloth, that bit of her collar that we looked at earlier, got the edge of that. There we go. There's like two little folds of the sweater visible there under her armpit, so we'll highlight those. And more little lines around the bottom edge of the sweater. A few more dots. That's probably enough. All right. Anybody got any questions? Does anybody want me to take a look at what they're doing? All right. I'm going to mix a bit of khaki now with some burgundy wine. And this is going to be to make the first shadow color on the pants. So on the sweater where we just kind of highlighted upwards, on the pants we're also going to add shadows downwards. So when you look at the pants, we're going to start right here on the front by the zipper. There's like a line where the zipper would be, and then to the right of that, closer to the gun, there's a little bit of a fold, so we'll color that in a darker color. We'll make a shadow there, and a shadow all along the edge of the gun. There we go. There's a little bit of a belt loop here, and we are going to paint the belt loop this color. This is the loop on her pants that the belt goes through. And then we've got some low spots in around kind of the crotch area there, and we'll put this color in between the raised areas on the side of her leg, going down now from the crotch, on the side away from the light. So we're darkening the inside of folds and the inside of the leg away from the light source. So once you get to her knee, basically the whole inside of her leg away from the light down to the top of the boot gets this color. Oh, sorry, drifted again. So all the way down there gets this color. And I'm going to paint a line around the cuff, so it looks like it has a little bit of a, either like it's been rolled up or there's a little bit of a hem there, all the way around the bottom. Okay, so that was the inside of the right leg from the front. Now we're going to do the same thing as the inside of the right leg from the back. The same idea, where the line of the pants meets in the center. There'd be a little shadow from that, little bit of a hem, or a seam, that's what I'm trying to say. And then under her butt cheek, that's going to cast a shadow. There's a little fold in the cloth there, so we put more shadow in the fold, and then work our way down the leg, painting this color all the way down the inside, focusing a little bit more effort on where there's depressions in the sculpt, right down the leg to the bottom, just above the boot. There we go. Well, there's the right leg, the first layer of shadow. And now we're going to do the same thing on the left leg. Now, starting at the back, the light is coming this way, so the shadow is going to be pretty strong just below her left buttock here, and then down the back of her leg, and on the inside of the leg. All of this area is going to be in near total shadow. So we're going to make this side of her leg quite dark, going down towards, now that little bit of her calf might get a little bit of light from behind. So we'll just leave that knot with a shadow on the back of the calf. But we will put a shadow the next time, and what that will do is this lighter patch will show through the next layer of shadow and give us an interesting sort of a variation. I'll do the same thing on the outside of her calf there, but then the bottom of the calf on the shadow side, I'm going to put this color. And maybe just a little bit in around under her knee, but not too much, because the light's going to come through and hit that part of her leg. It's definitely going to hit this part of her leg, but maybe not all the way in there. That might be a bit more in shadow. And this side of her leg, in by the holster of that knife, it's going to have a pretty good shadow in there. That's the shadow cast by the combat rifle. Okay, so there's our first layer of shadow on the pants. And now I'm going to take a daub of burgundy wine, add it into the mix, and make another darker shadow color. So in a sense what I'm doing here is taking red and mixing it with green. So red violet with green ochre to get a sort of a more neutral reddy gray color. And that's the color I'm using to create the shadow on the pants. Alright, so this color is darker, so we want to make the shadows that we make with this a little bit smaller. So like on that little belt loop, I'm going to put a couple little dabs just to be where like there would be a little bit of a seam there. And do the same thing down where the zipper would be. Not on the raised part of the zipper, but below where the pants would have the overlap, the fly. And put a little bit of shadow on the shadow side of that. And then work my way down. Start with the right leg. We have all those shadow areas we did before. We're going to do the same shadows again, but smaller. Right down along the inside of the leg. Right down to the bottom. There we go. Now I got a nice shadow in there. Now you remember I did that shadow line last time. We're going to do that shadow line again to give the appearance of either it being kind of rolled up cloth or it's a hem or something right above the boot cuff. So we're going to re-emphasize that one again. And now we're looking at the right leg from the back. So that same line that we had last time, where the hem would be, where the seam would be. A little bit of a line there. And now, because our light's coming from that side, we're going to go and make under her right butt cheek quite a bit darker than last time. We're going to make a much darker shadow now behind the holster. And then from her butt cheek, sort of from the butt cheek down to that leather belt, we're going to put this shadow in. And then down to where the creases are in the cloth behind her knee. And remember last time we left a little bit of a highlight. Oh, that was on the other leg. We'll do that in a minute. So we're just going to keep going down the inside of her right leg, but making sure that the shadow we put in this time is not as big as the one we did last time. Now we're going to do the other leg, the left leg. So same as before, this hip is not going to get much light. It's going to be quite a bit of a shadow right up under the sweater line there too, so we'll add that in. So right between the sweater and the pants. Then I'm going to start by the sheath of that knife on her belt. And start just a little bit lower than the shadow I did last time, a couple of millimeters. But then I'm going to put the same shadow I've just been making under her left buttock, and then follow it down the back of her leg, underneath the strap from the little knife, and then work my way all the way down, putting this color definitely in all those low spots where there's fold in the cloth. I'm not going to put it on this part of her leg here, but I am going to put it down below her calf. Right down to the cuff of the boot, and now we're making that same reinforced dark line around the cuff of the boot. There we go. Need some around this knee, I think. And now we're back to the front. So we're going to re-emphasize the shadow under the butt of the rifle and between the front of the leg and the knife sheath. I get some pretty strong shadows on the go there. If I'd rotate it, it's going to look pretty dark from this direction, looking up at her pants. I think the only piece which is out of balance is that piece of her calf. So I'm going to add a little bit more shadow on the side away from the light, down the lower part of that calf. Now when we're going to go back and glaze the mid-tone over all of this. So for now, that's going to be good enough. And once we do highlights, that's not going to look quite so bad. Alright, we're going to start highlighting the pants. So we take some more of our khaki color, and we add in just a touch of the creamy ivory, not too much. If we add too much at this stage, we're going to get a very stark looking highlight, and that's not really what we're looking for. You want just the first highlight is going to be pretty big, so we don't want it to be too big of a jump from the base coat. Alright, so now we're going to start with her right leg, left leg from our perspective, because now I'm putting a light paint over a dark paint and I'm trying to create a highlight. My brush stroke direction is going to be from the shadow towards the light so that more of the paint gets deposited where I lift the brush, and where I lift the brush is going to be closer to the light source. So as I work my way down, there's all these slightly raised folds of cloth. So I'm painting these on the tops of those little folds and deliberately not covering the shadows underneath, and that's going to give me a stronger definition of the shapes. And I work my way down the leg doing that. And I'm almost completely covering the midtone, but this color is very close to the midtone, so that's pretty much okay. And now my brightest line is about there, so I'm going to come back down the leg and pull from the shadow under that pistol holster back out to the front of the leg. So now I've got quite a strong highlight. It basically starts right underneath that little cloth loop on her belt. And I think I'm going to highlight the raised edges of that. There we go. So we've got a nice strong highlight going on in here. Keep pulling that dried tip off the brush. Now I'm going to orient the Mini again, and I'm going to start working down along her lower leg. So I get a little bit raised cloth there, a little bit there. So I'm hitting where the folds of cloth are raised and adding in more of this highlight color. Same thing on these bits above the boot that we kept putting those dark lines. So in between the dark lines, I'm going to carefully put a highlight in there, make that shape look even more pronounced. There we go. Now we want the brightest part of her leg to be basically a line that goes from the middle of her thigh, right about there. We want that to be relatively the same position on the lower part of her leg, right about there. So we're now going to come from the other direction and pull these lines forward from the back of the leg to the front on the lower part of her leg, so that where we lift off the brush is that line close to the front. Hey. Like that. And same thing on that little cuff on the bottom of the boot. Now on this butt cheek here, you want to put first a little bit of a highlight line where the edge of the seam would be, right there. And then we want a round shape highlight facing towards the light direction. So put that in. That's going to push up pretty much to the edge of the pistol butt, but then the pistol butt's going to cast a shadow on her leg. So we don't want to cover over the shadow right behind the pistol butt. There we go. And on our opposite leg, their right, I guess be our left buttock, there's going to be very little of that light get across, so just a bit at the top. There's going to be a round shaped highlight like that. Okay. And then as we go down the back of the right leg, we're going to catch just a little bit of the top of that shape there. So where the leather belt around her leg pulls in on the cloth, we're going to make it look like there's a little bulge in the cloth above and below that. Back of her knee. Get those raised bits of cloth all the way down. Now on the opposite leg, we're going to do a little bit more of that. Really not much, just where the highest bits of cloth are. And the reason I'm doing this, even though it's the dark side, is when we do the glaze with the mid-tone later, it's going to push these highlights in the shadow, it's going to push them back down to make them dark again. I do that on the front as well, on that leg. So down in this area here, the brush strokes pulling them towards the front. Hitting the raised bits of cloth. Up here on her left thigh, same idea. There's a little bulge of cloth above the leather strap. And then a little bit of a highlight on her thigh, but we don't want to fill in the shadow that the butt of that rifle is casting. And there we go. Alright, so you guys take a moment to paint and catch up. I'm just going to turn off the mic for 1 sec. Alright, does anybody have any questions? And does anybody want to post a snapshot of, if you're painting along, you're more than welcome to. If not, we'll just continue happily painting. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So, I want to do the highlighting on the pants, I think, 1 step lighter. So I'm going to put a little bit more creamy ivory into the mix. And I'm going to keep going. So all those highlights that I just did, I'm going to do them all again, but smaller. So I'll start with that same little spot on the belt and just highlight the edge of it. Same thing on that zipper, just give it a little tiny touch more. And then work my way down that leg, doing those same highlights again, aiming for the raised sections of cloth. I want my highlight to be strongest about there. So I'm going to have brush strokes coming from the other direction. Meet in the middle of the leg there. Give a nice strong highlight. There we go. Same thing down lower. Start by doing them, pulling from the shadow side towards the light on the raised areas. And then remember, we want to line up the highlight. So I'll start on the back again, pull towards the front. Nice strong highlight. There we go. And I want to do the same thing on the back. So a little bit on the raised area of the cloth there. That little bulge around the belt, we keep emphasizing that. Catch a bit of light. Top of the back of that calf, give it a little bit of an extra highlight. Not too much, just a little bit more. There we go. We will keep cleaning the tip off the brush. And now we're looking at the top of this bit of her backside. Light's going to catch there, but we're making a distinct shadow. The seam in the pants and the top of the back of the other buttock. There we go. Pretty happy with that. Just a touch more on the back of the leg down there. Not too much. Pretty happy with that. And we do the front of the leg. So a little bit down there. Still hitting the raised areas on the cloth. And recognize our light coming that way, so we're going to make the highlights meet. So essentially, I'm going to draw a line down the middle of her leg by overlapping the highlights right about there. pull from that side of the shadow and line it in. Pull from down there. And I think right in that area we just need to catch top of that cloth again. Go. Pretty happy with that. Okay. Now the last highlight we did on the sweater was the khaki. So I'm going to do a little bit more of a highlight on the khaki sweater with the same highlight color I was just using on the pants. So just on the most raised areas where I want it to be brown, just a little bit of extra. And this is dots, remember, because we're making a wool style texture. Really only hitting the most raised areas. There we go. Starting to look kind of soft, like it's got that wool effect we're hoping for. Same thing along the belt line. These are lines, not dots, though. Again, if people have questions, you're welcome to ask. Even if you're just listening in and you're not trying to paint along, if you have questions about what I'm doing or why, you're more than welcome to ask. Alright, I think that's enough for that wool sweater. And I'm going to do the first bit of highlighting now on the armor plates. So remember, for the armor plates earlier on, we started with Reaper Twilight Blue, and I'm going to go back to that color now. Wrong. I started with black, and then I highlighted the gun with Reaper Twilight Blue. So I'm going to grab that same color now, and I'm in the same way that I started doing the highlighting on the pants, I'm going to do that on the armor plates. This patch on her elbow, remember, we're going to make that like a pink Hello Kitty patch or something. But on the armor plates on the front, I'm basically looking for where the light is, and I'm just going to start adding in small highlights of this blue color, being careful not to paint over all the black. So I'm basically leaving black to be the shadow and just starting to slightly highlight with blue to catch the light. Do that on those buckles. And you can see where I highlighted the buckles, but I've left the shadow around the outside. And we're going to try to do that on all of these plates. So we'll do the one on our neck, top of her shoulder. I'm just kind of dabbing the paint. I'm not doing like full brush strokes. I'm going to make this armor quite beat up. I'm going to put all kinds of chips and stuff in it. So I don't need it to be really pristine. In the little diorama that I'm working on, that she's going to be in, there's a whole bunch of like lizardy dudes that they're fighting. And everybody's looking pretty battered. I just cannot stay on target today. What's going on? I think it must be because of the cork. I'm usually using a much larger handle. But I've cut the base off of her, and she's just on these little pins. And they don't mount on a glass jar very well. So she's on a cork. There we go. Thanks very much. Well, I hope we'll see you for a class in the future, or for one of these paint-alongs. Next one up is going to be the ship captain. That should be kind of fun. All right, so that was the armor plates on the chest and on her back, and now I'm going to do the ones on her knees. Exactly the same way. Go, just kind of dabbing some of this color on the side facing towards the light. Now on that one we lost the black line, and we'd have to paint that back in at the end, but that's fine, that's pretty normal. Alright, so now I'm going to take some of this color and add some of the snow shadow into it, make an even lighter gray blue color. And anytime you're painting black, you have to be very cautious not to turn it into another color. So if I start making a lot of great big blue highlights, very quickly this can look like blue instead of black. So I'm going to keep the highlights pretty small now, and really focus towards the edges of shapes on the side closest towards the light. So my light direction being over her left shoulder, sorry, her right shoulder, left from our perspective. I'm going to focus just on convex shapes, corners, so like this bits on her chest armor has these little straps. The corners of those are going to get a little bit of a highlight. The edge of the plate, just so the shape is more visible. Same thing on the one on her collar. One on her shoulder, we'll touch the edges of it. And the rounded shape on the top of it. This one here on her shoulder, it's a perfect place to put like some sort of a badge or something. We're going to make a nice roundish highlight on there, but I'm also going to put little dabs and dashes around the edge of it. A bit like an edge highlight. Same thing, looking at it from the back. Each of these little plates. I'm going to ignore these rings for now, and if there's time I'll do some special effects on those rings, make them look shiny, like they're, you know, power couplings, or I don't know, maybe make them pink LEDs. I haven't decided yet. I'll decide that later. What I do know is when I do some funky stuff on here, it's going to be bright, bright pink. That's the plan. Why? I don't know. It's just what I decided. There's no basis in color theory or anything smart like that. It's just what my mood was. Alright, so that's, we need to do the knee pads a little bit more as well. So we're getting lots of practice with the tiny little brush strokes. She's going to look pretty dirty and battered and weathered, which is what we want. Okay, I'm liking that. I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, now we're going to go back and do the same thing with straight snow shadow, but we have to make the dots really, really small and much, much fewer, or it's going to stop looking, it's already starting to look more blue than black. So we can have not too much paint on the brush. You want to be careful, like I just got a little bit of water in my paint. Too much water in the paint at this stage, and you won't be able to make small dots because the water will flood the paint off the brush. So you want to be careful not to use too much water to thin your paint at this stage. So we want tiny little dots. Tiny, tiny little dots. And I want it to look like the armor's chipped, right? So I don't want to make, I'm not making smooth, straight edge highlights. I want it to look quite beat up. If you've seen the movie Aliens, right? All the Marine Corps guys in that all their equipment is really, really battered and chipped, and it's like 20 different colors, but you can't tell because it's so beat up. That's kind of what I'm going for here, is like a very battered sort of look. I'm not actually trying to mimic that particular film, but that's the idea. All right. A few more on the back. I actually am trying to mimic a particular television program, but I don't really want to say what it is. Let's just say it's a sci-fi set in a new sort of a near future kind of thing. I'm trying to get that vibe. Things are pretty run down and dirty. Alright, a little bit more of that on the knees, and that's probably going to be enough for this color. There's going to be lots of scrapes and cuts and damage and all this. Alright, now, what is the next thing we need to do? Well, let's do the gun, because that is the thing that we are most likely to mess up the skin tone. So for the gun, I'm going to take some of my black off to the side, and this is a little blob of stone gray that I put on earlier, and I'm going to start mixing stone gray in with that to make a gray that's, I want it to be a warm gray so that it'll be different from the blue. But then when I chip it up later, I'll chip it up with the cold white. So it looks like shiny metal sticking out from underneath the dirty, dusty, greasy old weapon. And what I'm going to do now, I've got the light coming from up there. So I'm going to work with my brush on this angle. And I'm just going to try to catch the raised areas. It's a bit like dry brushing, but with a wet brush. So if my thumb was what I'm trying to paint right now, I kind of come along from an angle to catch the raised shapes on the surface of the gun. So like there's little ridges in my thumbnails going sideways along to catch the raised shapes. That's what I'm trying to do, and that'll bring out the details on the surface of this gun. So it's a very light touch. It takes a bit of practice, but that's why we're doing it. And so this is the first step of several, where I'm going to just use a progressively lighter color and hit progressively smaller spots, and it'll give the impression of the gun being a little bit shiny where it's chipped. And that should hopefully, it actually, when I normally do it, it only takes a couple of passes to get that. Now that type of rifle stock tends to be made of like hard plastic or something like that, or fiberglass or carbon fiber or something. So I'm not going to do too much in the way of chipping down on that, but I might put some dirt on it later. Alright, so that's our first pass. I'm going to do the same thing on the back. Okay, and this will be the only pass of this that we do on the back, because I want that side to be very shadowed. So just catching those raised areas just a little bit to bring out the details on the shadow side. She's got this really cool scope in there, and we might do a fancy light effect on that scope if we have time. Alright, so there's the first pass, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to use straight stone gray. That's a pretty big jump in value, so from a darker paint to a lighter paint. This stone gray is kind of a medium, mid-range paint, but it's going to stand out quite a bit. And then I'm going to go quite rapidly jump up to a much lighter paint, and that's going to give the illusion that the paint is a little bit shiny, or that the gun is a little bit shiny. That tends to look right on this sort of sci-fi weapon. So same thing I did before, but just making the details that we hit, like hitting them in a smaller area. Really focus on edges, bumps, little knobs and levers. And if you can see this, but the angle that my brush is on, I'm at a very low angle to the Mini. If I come in on an angle like this, the brush will go right to the bottom of the details, and the shadows around the details disappear. So painting it on an angle like this, like I said, it's a bit like dry brushing, but with a wet brush. I'm just touching softly enough just to hit the most raised details, and the brush can't reach into the low spaces. And I'm looking for particularly corners and lines that face towards the light to create those kind of reflections of the light source. Now, like I said, we're not going to do this on the back. We've already got the back light enough. Okay, that's about what I want. And now I'm going to mix this, what was this, solid white? Yeah, solid white 50-50 with the stone gray. It's going to give us more of a light neutral gray. And I'm going to do it again. But, again, smaller spaces. And again, I'm not adding a lot of water. At this stage, if I start adding a lot of water, the paint will flow too much, and I won't be able to control where it lands. So again, looking for edges, points, corners, areas where the weapon might be struck. So like, excuse me. One thing that frequently happens with a weapon like that is the magazine being slammed in, misses, and it chips all along that edge. So that's a good spot to put a few extra little dings. Along these rails, tends to hit the wall going around corners. Tends to hit the barrel doesn't tend to hit the ground if the soldier knows what they're doing, but when you dive onto the ground to take cover, quite often the bottom of the magazine hits the ground, which of course causes stoppages of the weapon, but you know, it's life. So we're just picking out those shapes a little bit. There we go. That was probably a little bit too much on the magazine, but we'll fix that in a minute. There, now that shape's really starting to show. And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it again, but this time with almost pure white. Now I want to save pure white for very specific things like the center of light sources, the reflection dots and eyes, but I'm going to add the same amount of white again to this gray. So it's going to be, I don't know, a value of about 70-80% white, something like that. And now when I go to do these chips and marks, they're just dots. They're just dots on corners. So like this this little reflex sight here is going to get just a couple of dots on the corners. The ejection port, one or two little dots. Magazine housing, same thing. Tip of the magazine, that edge of the magazine is going to catch the light. This area down here, remember, we decided is not metal, so we're not going to put any more highlights down there. But these rails and these things at the front, they're either plastic covering the barrel or they're metal. So, and I've seen both, but I think it's legitimate to treat them either as plastic or metal. The plastic ones tend to break. I think they're more like a carbon material. Anyway, there we go. A few little dots and shapes to bring out the details on the rifle. Starting to look pretty shiny, and I think that's good enough for that. Now we can do the skin tone, and I think you can see why. If I'd done the skin tone first and then tried to do that, I probably would have hit the skin half a dozen times. Alright, so back to our rosy skin that's been sitting in the palette for like 2 hours, and it's still good to go because of that lovely wet palette. It might actually even have a little bit too much water in it. And we're going to take some of that, and we're going to mix it on top of the paint we were using earlier as our base coat. Just throw a daub of rosy skin tone on top of that, and that's going to be the next color that we use. So it's just going to have a hint of that purple added into it. We don't need a lot of paint on the brush. Sorry, I think I'm being texted and oh, thought I heard the notifications from Twitch. Okay. So, looking at the skin tone, we're considering our light coming from that direction. So we're not painting everything this super bright color. The areas in the shadow side, that's probably, we might do one layer of highlight. Now that's going to probably be too light. On the back of the hand, I'll have to glaze that back down again. I think this color needs to be focused really towards the front, towards the light source. So all my brush strokes, like on the fingers here, I'm going to be aiming to sort of highlight on the knuckles, a little bit, just a touch on the back of the hand, but then working the brush forward to increase the amount of paint that's going on closer to the front. And I can repeat those, bring up the values on the hand close to the front. We're going to do the back of this thumb down here, the back of that hand, so we want to do quite a bit on, we'd put like a dot on each of those knuckles. And then we're going to put some lines on the back of her hand. And then we need to do the back of the fingers. And that's one of the reasons I put that strong shadow between the fingers. It was almost one of the first things we did. Because now I'm going to use that same technique of very, very tiny brush strokes to bring out the knuckles on the back of her hand. Okay. Now this is one of the frustrating parts, because for me today, my brush is drying out almost instantly. Every time I make a brush stroke, I am getting a little bit of dry paint on the tip. There's not much I can do about that without putting additives or something in, and I don't really want to mess around with that today. So I'm just going to be cognizant of it and clean it off every time it happens. Now, on the face, if you think about the light coming in at the face, so this side of the nose is going to get lots of light, so we'll give that a nice big highlight. The edge of her eye up there, like the orbit around the eye, is going to catch the light. The Cupid's bow under her nose is going to catch the light, so we'll highlight there. And the chin under her mouth is going to catch some light, as well as most of the light is going to be caught by the round shape of her cheek. And what I'm trying to be careful not to do is reach in with the tip of the brush and hit the eye, because I've already got my eyes painted. Now you can see that's looking a little bit chalky there. That's because my brush is drying out as we go. Just reload it. So I'm just going to be very careful not to paint this flesh tone over the eyes that are already painted, and try not to lift up any slightly wet paint as I go. So I want a strong shadow. So on this side where I paint the whole side of the nose, on the other side I'm just going to paint the nostril. Give the nose a little bit more shape. When I highlight on the other side, I'll do the same thing with the next lighter color. We're going to hit the top of her cheek on this side. And she's got this little microphone on her little radio thing she's got going on. So we want to be careful not to hit that. There we go. That's the general outline of the Yeah, got a nice big dried daub of paint right in the middle of her cheek. Perfect. There we go. Okay, clean my brush off again. I might have to put a touch of water in that paint. I don't really want to, but... Okay, so the next one is just going to be pretty much straight rosy skin tone. So same thing as before, back of these fingers. So the knuckles on the fingers closest to the light, but not the back of that hand. The hand which is close to the light, I am going to do the back of that hand. And I'm going to emphasize the knuckles on the hand. And the knuckles part way up the fingers. Where they kind of wrap around that magazine. Or the handle of a rifle. Pistol grip, I guess it'd be called. The grip. There we go. Now I'm going to make sure I don't have a little... Yeah, there we go. Divot of paint on the tip of this brush. And now I'm going to go back and do those same highlights again. Smaller. When I get to the side of the nose, I'm just going to do the side of the nostril and the bridge of the nose. Just this side of the upper lip. Just this side of the chin. And I'm going to do a nice round highlight on the cheek. There we go. So she's got nice light highlights there. And I'm going to grab some creamy ivory now, and I'm going to make my first skin tone highlight. Skin tone highlight. About 50-50, a little bit less than 50-50, so more rosy skin than ivory. And get most of it off the brush. So the brush is loaded with fresh paint. It's not overloaded though. And I'm really just focusing on her face now. Actually, you know what? I'll do those knuckles. The knuckles on the back of her hand need a bit more of a highlight. Brings it up. And now we'll do the shape in the center of her cheek. Make a nice round cheek. Side of her nose. Tip of her nose. Yeah, I'm starting to kind of hate this brush. It's got like the guide hair just a little bit too long. And it keeps dumping dried paint right off the tip of it in chunks. Like it's getting dried paint almost immediately upon being loaded. C'est la vie. That's the weather we live in right now. Okay, nice bright highlights coming up on the cheek. I'm going to put one on the opposite side under her eye, where the light would kind of go past her nose and catch the top of her cheek. It's a little bit more natural. There we go. And we need to go one level brighter. So I'll go to straight creamy ivory, I think. Or almost straight. And this highlight will focus right in the middle of her cheek and on the tip of her nose. So there's the cheek. It's that bright highlight. And there I did it. I put the highlight right into her eyeball. Because that little whip of paint on the tip just keeps growing. It's almost like as it dries, it slides out and more paint grows on the tip of it. Alright. So now we need to give her a lipstick color, so I'm going to grab some straight burgundy wine. I'm going to bring the brush in on an angle, parallel to her mouth. I'm going to come in this way and just kind of hit the bottom of her upper lip and let the brush rest against her lower lip to make that lip more visible. This needs a bit. But where she's our Hello Kitty soldier, I think maybe we'll give her some bright pink lipstick for no other reason than that. So I'm just going to get some of this bright pink, and I'm going to put a little dab of it on her lower lip, just a little touch. There we go. That makes her look a little bit more, I don't know more what. Makes it look more something. And I'm going to fix that eye that I messed up now. So I'm going to put a black line under her right eye to fix the mess that I made. There. Cleaned it up. And while I'm here, I'm going to redo the black line on the side where her little microphone is. I managed to get some skin tone on the end of the microphone as well. And I think there's one more spot to clean up. This little shape right in there. I don't know if you can see that. Right there, the tip of that shape has been painted with flesh tone, and we're going to make it black again. And probably in the process get black paint on her cheek. Oh, didn't really mess it up. I can live with that. Okay. So now, the last thing, not the last thing, we got a few more things to do on this, but we are going to put a tiny, tiny, tiny little white dot on her lip. Now, if you're a beginner, I don't recommend trying this until you get pretty good brush control, but the idea is to put a little tiny white dot as like a reflection point, suggest that her lips are a little bit moist. There we go. And because I'm a glutton for trauma, I'm going to put reflection dots in her eyes as well. Assuming I can even get the brush in there. Yeah, that'll do. Not super happy with that. So, how do we fix it? We go back and get our burgundy wine. We put it back over the lip, and that covered up the top half of that little white reflection dot. I feel like her skin is missing something, so I am going to put a little bit of a glaze of, what color should we use for this? Ooh, Reaper Clear Red. I've used that before. Or what's this called? Clear Magenta. That's probably totally the wrong color for that. Let's try. What else we got going on here? What I really want is just a little bit of a red tint. All right, let's try. Yeah, let's use Reaper Blood Red. Why not? 9003 Blood Red. Probably a little bit too strong for the job. Got just a tiny little drop of it on the palette there, and I'm going to thin that down by like 20 to 1. 20 parts water, very little paint. Practically none of it on the brush, and it's still too strong, so we'll keep thinning it. basically I just want like dirty paint water that's red. Okay, and I'm gonna just enough like that, because what will happen is when I put that over the skin tone, which already has a lot of red in it, that's going to sort of increase the red amount, red saturation in the skin, and make it look a little bit more rosy. So on the back of the hand, for example, I'll start up by the knuckles, just wiggle the brush on the knuckles to get a little bit of red paint to come off, and then push the excess off to the side, down around the cuff. Kind of park it there in the shadow. That's just a little bit more of a warmer skin tone. Same thing on the back of the hand up there by the shadows. And I want to do that on her cheek as well. So I'm going to do a little bit of this in by the side of her nose. By her laugh line. She's going to get kind of a strong red laugh line as a result. And then the rest of it I'm going to push off along the side of her face. Kind of underneath her cheek, almost like a blush. And it's going to darken as it dries and make her look a little bit more lifelike. And that's what I want. Okay. Can we let's get a good zoom on that right now. Okay. Hopefully that little tiny bit of pink is showing there. Okay. Now we're going to do some leather. So when we did the first bit of leather, we mixed some black and brown. And that was this little mess down here. So I'm going to put some more of that, was it harvest brown or harvest orange or something. And I'm going to redo all the leather bits with that color. Slightly lighter brown color. So that's going to be, that's not too bad, we'll do it like that. So that edge of the knife sheath, that's the strap for the knife, the strap for the pistol, a little bit of leather at the top, the bit that goes over her belt. Do the belt itself. Now we haven't painted the belt buckle yet, which is right in there. So we'll just leave that black for now. Put a dot on the other side of it. Main leathery bit of the holster. There we go. Do the straps on the back. Trying to avoid lightening up the bits in the shadows. Just giving a little touch of this color on the shadow side. Sorry, I keep drifting. There we go. On the outside of that sheath. A little bit on the handle of the knife. That's about all that needs. And now I'm going to go back and grab straight orangey brown. And if you guess that I'm about to do the same highlights again but smaller, you're catching on. This is the middle color from Reaper's Autumn Browns Triad. And that Autumn Brown Triad is really good as kind of a warm brown leather color. The two lighter paints in the Triad are quite transparent, so they layer really, really well for making like orangey. So like where leather kind of gets folded or chipped, or it starts to wear thin. You get these lighter patches, and this color is really, really good for that. And when you add, like, I'm going to add some of the creamy ivory to it now. It makes it like a nice washed out sort of color that's great for the that effect of like leather wear around the edges of objects. Like where the holes are in stitching, or really anything like that. It's really good for it. Quite like it. Don't remember why I started using that particular paint for that. Might have been something somebody told me on the Reaper forums. The Reaper forums are a great place to get information about painting. Post your pictures on there, get lots of feedback. Post your work in progress and get feedback. It's a bit like the Discord here. Although it tends to be populated with an interesting mixture of really, really experienced painters and complete novices, which is really good for beginners. So you should never hesitate to post on there, because the moderators and all those guys make sure that it's a welcoming place for beginners. Alright, starting to come along pretty good. She's looking like a mercenary now. Alright, I'm going to go one color lighter on the leather. So I'll put another daub of the skin, or the, what's that color? Creamy ivory in. And I do some more leather damage on the belt. Put a little bit of damage on the tip of that sheath. A bit more on the belt. On the edge of the belt line. There we go. A holster like that tends to get pretty beat up. Like there's like a hinge spot right around there that the leather tends to break. At least mine did. Damage like that, where it keeps getting bashed up as pistol gets put back. There we go. Like it. I think that's light enough. Now the helmet. The helmet is still kind of leaving me not super sure how I want to do it. So let's do the boots instead. So right now the boots are black, and I am going to use burgundy wine as my leather color on the boots. So I'm just going to look at all the separate panels on the boots and give them a separate highlight of burgundy wine and leave the rest of them black. So what do I mean by that? So I look like on the ankle there's one piece of leather, right? And there's a seam between this piece and the next. So I'm going to paint a highlight with burgundy wine on the leather boot, but not fill in the black that's in that seam. And that's going to kind of help keep those leather chunks separate. Do the same thing at the back. Same thing at the edge of the sole. And then we're going to come back, we're going to lighten this color up, and we're going to do something similar to what we just did on the belt. We're going to do a little bit of leather damage. And we're going to hit all those spots where the leather gets the most wear. So that's going to be at the ankle and near where the toes, just behind the toes really, where the foot bends in the shoe. You tend to get that one little spot where there's leather damage at the edge, and that's what we're gonna mark that out. And then we'll go a little bit lighter and we'll mark the laces. So let's put in, well, let's just throw some random assortment of colors together. A little bit of orange, brown, a little bit of burgundy wine, a little bit of pink skin tone. Make a really gross, kind of neutral color. And this will be the start of our damage to our leather boots. So I'm going to pick out the laces with this. I'm going to pick out the tip of the toe where she might have kicked a door or two in. Might have. I know she did. It's in the diorama. This is where the toe, this is where the boot bends with that constant action of walking. So we're going to make quite a bit of damage right there. And the ball of the ankle, just above it where she grips it to put the boots on. And the edge of the heel tends to get smacked up pretty good. There we go. So we're focusing our damage to help tell the story of the Mini. Something similar on the other side. Bearing in mind that on the shadow side of the boot, most of this is going to be invisible, because it needs the light to pick out those little bits of shapes. Alright, let's throw some more skin tone in there. And just really focus in. This little spots of damage. I was just saying this paint along is about tiny, tiny, tiny brush strokes. Tip of the toe on that boot. I think the other one is fine. And again, that spot where the boot bends. And we do the same thing again with straight skin tone, no other color. And we'll do the final little bits of damage with a bit of that ivory color. There we go. A little bit of damage on the boots. And just for some variety, I'm going to put a few little dots of this on the other leather as well. And I said I was going to put some ivory on there. I changed my mind. I'm not doing it. Okay. Now we're going to do... What are we doing for time? Oh, we're doing really good for time. Oh, I see. Okay, so I missed that question about the guide hair. So the bundle of bristles, okay, is a line so that the hairs are progressively forward, and there's one hair in the center which is the longest. And that's the hair that basically all the other hair is feeding paint to flow off that one in the center. Okay? And when that particular hair gets pulled out, then the bristles around it they basically don't hold as tightly to the center. So that's when you lose the tip of the brush, is when that longest hair in the center gets pulled out. So on this particular one, we've got... Can I get a good shot of that? It's really hard to see, but there is one hair which is like almost a millimeter longer than the ones around it. And that's the one that all the paint is starting to dry on, and that's... So yeah, so the brush is designed to deliver paint to that longest hair at the tip. You can see that pretty good, actually. What if I put it against the helmet? It's right there. Yeah, and a lot of people think that if they trim that, their brush will work better, and it won't. The brush basically stops working when you lose that hair. Alright, speaking of hair, she needs some hair color. We'll do that in a minute. I think for now, I'm going to start by painting. I'm going to paint that patch on her elbow, and we're going to paint her helmet pink. So I'm going to get some burgundy wine. I'm going to grab some breast cancer pink, mix the two together, and make a gross kind of purpley color. I like it. I'm going to put that on the patch on her elbow. Just going to dab it on the patch. And then when I look up at her helmet up here, I'm going to put that pink color on the visor. All the way across the visor. Like it's something that she... this is actually... I don't think this is actually the visor. I think this is a visor protector. And the visor, like the actual eye protection, is underneath this. So you can pretty much do whatever you want with this. And it doesn't affect the material underneath. The only thing it affects is the Sergeant Major's temper when he catches you with something bizarre painted on your visor. Now, I don't know if Tess McFadden here has to deal with the Sergeant Major. Maybe she is the Sergeant Major. I don't know. Actually, I have a feeling in this story her dad was the Sergeant Major, and she's basically painted Hello Kitty on her visor as a way to tell him to get lost. Alright, there we go. So I did that to get a base color that when I now add the breast cancer pink right on top of it, it's got a solid foundation, so I don't have to try to do like 15 layers of this pink. There's already pink on there, mixed with another color. And this is just going to basically start increasing the saturation without having to fight a lot to get the pink color to build up. So I can basically, right from the get-go now, focus on maneuvering the drops of pink paint that I put on there into position to give me the strongest highlight. Or move it to where I want the strongest highlight to be. There we go. There's the patch on her elbow. Got some nice pink on it. And now we'll do the thing on her helmet. Now with the light being that way, I want the pink to be strongest towards that light source. So I'm going to work my way across. Pulling the pink from right to left. Building it up. Then, of course, I'm going to chip the heck out of it because she's a combat veteran and she's kicking ass. So I'm sure lots of bits of dirt and dust and whatever ricocheted off the wall. Or she's crashed through bushes or smashed through barbed wire or something. And the helmet's gotten chipped up. Or the painter, in control of the brush, just managed to tear a huge divot out of the paint by being not very careful. And Tess is not going to be happy with him. Let me show you where I did that. Right there. Right there is a little circle which is darker, and I tore a divot of partially dried paint out right there. I'm going to have to work to fix that now. And there's that next little daub of dried paint at the tip. Alright. I'm going to have to look up what a Hello Kitty looks like, actually. I'm not going to remember. I know we used to have tons of that stuff around the house, but I haven't seen one in years. Or if maybe there's something else you guys would like to see painted on the hair or painted on the visor. If you got an idea, let me know and I'll paint something funny on there for you. Yeah. Say again? Okay. There, I like it. Alright. And I think she really likes pink, so she's going to have pink streaks in her hair at some point here in a minute. Alright, so the remainder of her helmet, I'm going to do it white. So I already painted it this kind of blue-gray color. So I'm going to get a mix of blue-gray with that snow shadow color, and that's going to be my next layer to build up the foundation for the white. And the white is the same idea as what I just did with the pink, right? You can't just slap white on and go for it. It doesn't really work. So we build up a foundation, and I want this to be a really shiny kind of cold white, like a space helmet. So I'm going to start with a cold color, which is going to be this cold gray, and then I'm going to build up my colors on that as a foundation for the white. Now this thing is a crazy antenna, so I'm going to leave that for now. But these little stripes, they're going to be white. So I'll put a bit of this color on there. Oh, sorry, I drifted on you. There we go. A little bit on that one. So the trick to doing those, again, is the angle of the brush, right? If you look at it from above, the brush is on that angle, and it's like edge highlighting a tiny space, and it really reduces your risk of hitting the wrong thing. And then for the helmet, the brightest spot is about there. So I'm going to do all my brush strokes pulling from the periphery towards that spot. That's going to help me build up a nice strong highlight. Clean the little bit of hair or dried paint off the end of the brush again, and keep going. There we go. So for the people that have just joined us, you're more than welcome to ask questions as we go. That's what this is all about, is kind of a paint along and learn to paint and talk about painting techniques. There we go. So there's our first foundation color, and the next thing I'm going to do is go straight to the use straight snow shadow, which has a lot of white filler in it already. And that is going to be the next layer of foundation for our white. Okay, so if you so just remember that the videos of these are going to go online on YouTube. Sometimes we do have a little bit more of a challenge to get them on YouTube. The one from last week, I managed to wreck the video, so I have to repaint it, retape it. But generally speaking, they go on YouTube about a week after these classes, so if you do miss the paint along, that's what the videos are for. And you can always send me a message if you have a question about something. I'm like, check the Miniature Monthly Discord every day, or you could always message me through my website or on Facebook, and I'm more than happy to take questions from people. I don't read the comments on the videos though, so don't ask your questions there. The videos are not posted on a channel that I control. It's controlled by Miniature Monthly. But you're more than welcome to ask questions. And of course, if you want your own individualized one-on-one painting class, I do that too. Although I really do recommend Matt, Liz, and Aaron's painting classes are outstanding. I've taken classes from all three, and they're all, like, just, I love it. They're awesome. Alright, so there's our snow shadow. Now we've got 50-50 mix of snow shadow and pure white. And same deal. Each of these highlights is slightly smaller than the last. But my white color is going to very, very suddenly get very strong as a result of that good foundation. I've been putting putting down for it. See, Count Ulrich there is typing a question. You guys are welcome to just ask your questions out loud over the mic if you want. You don't have to type them. We generally speaking go back and edit out all the specific questions unless it's really general. Oh, it's a long one. I appreciate that that comment. That's very kind of you to say that. I think I've said this before during these classes, but my aim is to have students here in the studio as well, because that way I can gauge how fast to paint and when to pause, when to slow down, when to pass the mini around, when to wait, ask for, give people a chance to get feedback. And I think that'll help make the paint-alongs a little bit more manageable for people, rather than watching me paint way too fast. And I know that I paint too fast. I do my best to slow myself down in these videos, or these, paint-alongs. Yeah, well, I will just say again that people are welcome to ask questions. That is what it's all about. So even if you're not painting along, you're just watching me muck around, you're welcome to just unmute your mic and say, Geoff, what the hell did you just do? Sometimes I might not even know that I did it. See, I'm doing it now. While I'm listening or thinking about what you said, I started doing something that I should have said what I was doing. So what did I do? I put black on my brush, and without really thinking about it, I started going back and adjusting the highlights and shadows in different spots, bringing back areas where the black got covered over. And the reason I did that is because as I was painting the helmet, I accidentally covered the black completely, and I lost the shadow on the visor. And of course, once I have black on the brush, I can't stop myself from then just carrying on and fixing every other little thing that needs to be adjusted that I see. Which is kind of precision stuff, and it's not something I would do normally in one of these paint-alongs. But it really does help to bring back the definition of different shapes. If you don't already do black lining, then the time to start is pretty much now, because it's really one of the most useful techniques. There, she's coming along pretty good now. We're getting to like the 90% base coated, 90% highlighted stage. Not base coated, 90% highlighted. The only thing I haven't done really is her hair. So what color do we think we should paint her hair? I'm kind of leaning towards electric blue with a pink stripe. But I don't know, what do you folks think? So I didn't go all the way to pure white for the same reasons I didn't go all the way to pure white on the gun. We saved the pure white for where we really need the highest values, where we need the lightest colors to be. So this helmet is going to look white, but it's not actually going to be white. It's going to be a cold blue off-white. All right, there's one vote for electric blue dyed hair. The kind that'll make the mercenary sergeant major unhappy. Whatever they call him. Comptroller, probably. There we go. The helmet's Starting to almost look white. Alrighty. What do we still need to do? The hair, and we need to do a little bit more battle damage. We need to highlight this stuff on her head and on her the edges of her helmet. And we need to give her some little glowing lights. We've got enough time to do that, so we'll do it. We're going to give her some little orange lights on her little helmet cam thing there. So to set the conditions to do those lights, I got to start by putting the pure white that I've been saving into the lights. Now the lights, I don't know if they're visible on the bones one, but right in the tight corner here, there are two little tiny holes. And I'm filling those with white paint, and those are going to be my lights. Okay, that's the plan. So we'll let that dry. We'll probably have to do that again before we can paint the lights. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a very light colored stripe of like this snow shadow white mixture where I want the hair highlights to be, to kind of map them out for me. So her hair in this little space in here, it's pretty hard to see. It's right back in there. So we need to, that's where we need to paint hair. It comes out under her collar here, or under her helmet there. And its outward curve is about the, sorry. It's convex in a line right around there. So that's the shiny line of her hair, is like that. And because it protrudes from under the helmet, there's going to be a slightly shiny line around there too. And then I'm just going to mark out the shape of the hair a little bit more to give me kind of a guide. There, that's our start point. And as previously discussed, we're going to give her a stripy pink highlight. So we'll just grab the straight breast cancer pink, and I'm going to put a line of that, I think, right there, right in the middle of all that hair, like that. There we go. And the rest of her hair is going to be electric blue. So, what's the most electric blue that I own? Well, the most electric one that I can see is Reaper Phantom Glow, which is a really cool blue paint. It's awesome. It's more like a super saturated teal. All right, now where am I going to put this on the palette and not make a mess? Back there somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to paint a base coat with this super bright blue paint now, right over the hair zones that I've already just kind of mapped out. And then I'm going to go back and create shadows, and I'll go back and do the highlights at the end. So this is just the start point for this super bright hair that we're going to do. This Phantom Glow, I don't know, I like it. There's Runic Glow, Red Neon Glow. Can't remember what the other one is. I think there's 4 of them that I really like for doing like object source lighting. Oh, Moth Green, which I know is not like a glow color, but it's really, really good for it. Yeah, so Phantom Glow, Runic Glow, Red Neon Glow, and Moth Green, my favorite colors for glow effects. Alright, so we're going to let that dry for a moment. Now, let's do a little bit more damage to her armor. So what I'm going to do is go back to that snow shadow and pure white mix that I had. Basically what I'm going to do is going to make some like slash marks. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is get dark paint, black actually. I'm going to go back. I'm going to make each of them look 3D by putting a dark line on the top of them to make them look like they're kind of gashes. Okay? So this is how you make the illusion of damage. You start with the white and then you put the black. You can do it the other way. Personally, I like doing it this way, but the key is the light line goes away from the light source. The shadow is cast by the material, like the light not getting into the material. Okay? So we need to... It's much more difficult if you do it with... If our light source is that way, if I do it like this, which side of that is casting the shadow? So when you go to put your battle damage on, just consider that you're going to have to put a shadow in it and choose the orientation to make it easier on yourself. That's not cheating. That's just being efficient. It's one of the reasons to choose your light source as early as possible so you can kind of know where you're going to end up with the... So my light is coming from this way. So if I put a slash on her shoulder pad, like that, that is going to make sense to have the shadow on the bottom. There's a bit more damage. We'll do a little bit more across that chest plate, like she got hit with a sword or something and it went right across. Do a couple more little bits of damage on the edge of that one. Do a little bit across the butt of this rifle, like she gonked somebody in the head with it, because, you know, soldier, mercenary, that's what they do. And some on those knee pads. Okay, and let's put a little bit of damage up there on the neck, like it got, she nearly got shot, but it didn't quite work. Okay, so there's our little bits of damage, and now we're going to go back and get some black. Now normally the way I do this is I get my super thinnest brush, I'll mix a bit of black ink in with black paint, use some flow improver to make the finest, tiniest little lines possible. But I'm assuming that most beginners do not have that material at hand. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to thin the black a little bit with water, and I'm going to prep my brush to get the finest line. So, and I do that by loading it and rolling it constantly so that the tip looks as sharp as possible. And then I'm going to go back in and make my shadows exactly like I just described a moment ago. So there's the first one. And the narrower the white piece you leave behind, the better the damage is going to look. And this is where that guide hair is super useful, because it helps you get the paint to land in the right spot. There we go. And we need to put a little bit on that collar right there where the bullet tried to go through. And then we're going to do another one on that part of her chest right there. Now that one I almost completely eliminated by mistake. So what do? I gotta go back, reload with the light color and fix it. Green. There we go. And bring back that bit of damage. There we go. Now she looks like she's got that scratch in her armor. Go back to my black. Bit on that one. And then do these ones. Damage. And here we go. A couple more on the gun, and then we'll be done with that bit of. There we go. I think getting close to being done. So I'm going to just do a little bit of blue-gray on those pieces on the edge of her helmet. These bits in here. Just to bring their shapes out a little bit. Now if I was feeling a bit sassy, I'd paint a number or something on the cheek plate there, but not really feeling the what am I trying to say? Not every day is a good day to try to do freehand designs, right? Conditions need to be good, your brush needs to be good. And I'm not super happy with this particular brush today, so there we go. Highlight that little weird blade camera thing. Okay, and we're going to highlight it again because, you know, once is never enough. Actually, there's a good rule of thumb to remember if you're a beginner is whenever you think something is highlighted enough, that's when you know it needs another highlight. Because there's a pretty good chance that when you're starting out, you're giving natural light too much credit, and it actually doesn't make things as visible as you think it does. So those shapes and things disappear when you put the mini back down on the table. You paint it, you think it's bright enough, you put it down, the detail disappears. So when you're starting out and you say to yourself, that looks bright enough, that's when you know you need to put another highlight. You might realize that what I've just described is an endless loop that only ends with pure white. And that's not a bad thing, because it'll get you used to highlighting things to a very, very high value, like high value in terms of light. And when you get used to that, it becomes much easier to decide that something is in fact too light, or that it's too dark, or it gives you a perspective, I guess, something to compare against to decide if things are the right value. Okay, so there's our little helmet highlight, there's our mouthpiece highlight, and there's well, we just need to do a little bit more on that antenna. In fact, we're almost at the stage where we can put the light on the antenna. I can still see that the phantom blue, the phantom glow blue, is not dry yet. That's why I haven't done the hair yet, but that's coming very soon. And I do need to do a quick bit of research to find what a Hello Kitty looks like, because I can't remember for the life of me. And we're going to paint a Hello Kitty on her elbow and on her helmet. This is the plan. Is it a good plan? I don't know, but it's the plan. Alright, I'm going to put some gray in the hair, bring some shadow back. So I'm just putting a little bit of shadow back in the hair where I put too much light, particularly on this shadow side. There's what I want. So that the color is present in the shadow, but it's not dominant. That's kind of what I was looking for. There we go. Now I can go back. So to highlight with these really, really super saturated colors, I've already put down one layer of the saturated color. I'm going to mix that color with pure white to make a version of it which has higher value. So it's not as saturated, but it's lighter. And then I'm going to go back and do those highlights. Remember I talked about the outward face, like the convex curves? Get a highlight with that white mix. It's like they're reflecting the light a little bit. A little bit at the top back there. Go. And then I'm going to do them with pure white again on that one, and then I'll do the magenta one. There we go. Oh, I forgot to do the halfway one on the magenta because I was talking too much. So there's our magenta and white mix. Just gives it this little extra bit. There. Now we've got blue-green hair with a pink stripe. I think we can do a little bit more highlighting on that little elbow pad. Okay, I'm going to take 2 seconds to look up what Hello Kitty looks like, and then we'll paint it on her helmet. Hello Kitty. Images. Oh, right. Okay. Download. Okay. So, how do I do that? Let's get rid of that. Of course I did. Dropped out of the Discord by mistake. Sorry about that. I dropped out of hit the wrong X. Oh, of course, now we're back to this foolishness. Video. Voice and video. There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, just looked up the Hello Kitty, and it's not that it's not as bad as you might think. It's gonna be relatively painless. I'm gonna pull up a how do I do that? I'm gonna add photo. Here we go. Add an image. Okay. Browse. Download. Okay, there we go. Not going to be too bad, because all we're going to do is we're going to make a big white circle, and a little bit of an X, and 2 dots. That is phenomenal looking. Love it. Yeah, really good. Lots of details being caught. The hand looks awesome. The face looks awesome. Great work on that texture on the cloth. The leather's looking great. Great work on the pants. Boots look good. That's great work. And for joining in late and then just painting like crazy to catch up, that's really good. Really impressive. And thanks for showing me the picture. I appreciate that. It's looking good. All right, I am going to do a little silly bit of Hello Kitty now. Here's how we do it. We're going to do elbow, a little bit of white on the elbow. So Hello Kitty is an oval. So we'll do that little oval. Oh, especially do it on camera, that'd be more useful, eh? A little bit of an oval. And I give her some ears. One. Two. And then we're going to give her some little dark colored eyes. Tiny little eyes. 1, 2. So we don't really have to paint Hello Kitty. We just have to give a suggestion that Hello Kitty is there. Little whiskers. So there's a suggestion of Hello Kitty. I like it. So, I don't think I will do it on the helmet. I think we'll leave that for now. Got one on her elbow. That's a good start point. But I am going to do glowing orange lights. Let's do glowing orange lights on her helmet. So the key for any glowing light is color saturation with high value center. Okay, color saturation and a high value center. So the high value center we've already got by putting the white dots in there. Okay. Then what we're going to do is get color saturation by mixing our neon orange with some white. That's going to give us a high value, very orange color. And we fill in that space with this color. Fill in the orange. Okay, now what's going to happen is, as it dries, it's going to darken, and then we're going to repaint the center white. Then we're going to paint it again orange, and then we're going to repaint the center white. So we achieve high value with the white center and color saturation by repeating the orange a couple of times. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to put like a little bit of orange light on the edge of the visor right there and right there to suggest that the lights are shining and hitting the edge of the visor. A little bit on the helmet right there too, just just for fun. Okay, so the lights are actually shining and creating an effect in their environment. That's also key. So there we go. There's our first steps. Now I'm going to redo the orange. I'll let that dry for a moment. And we're almost there. Could put a little bit of detail on that pistol handle while we're waiting. Okay. I also didn't put anything on those rings on her back, and I'm still not really sure what I want to do with them. Let's make them shiny while we're waiting for the neon. I don't know if you can see that right now, but there's like a really long bit of, there it is, bit of dried paint sticking off the end of this brush. So how do we make things look shiny? The basic rule is the smaller the highlight, the shinier it will appear. So you want super shiny next to super dark, and things are going to look shiny. So to make those little rings at the back now look extra shiny, I'm going to put a white, like super pure white dot of paint right in the middle of those highlights that I just did. And that is going to make them look bling. Shiny bling. Because of the pure white right next to the black. Just give me 1 sec. So we're almost done. So there's our shiny little things on the back. And now our orange LEDs are almost dry. And we can redo the center with pure white and give them their last moment of, their last little bit of bling. Right in the middle. There we go. And now we have little shiny orange lights. Alright, I think that is the end. So I'll just wait for a couple of moments to see if anybody has any final questions. And then, if not, I will sign off. Yeah, you're welcome. I really enjoy doing these. And like I said, hopefully we'll do this with people in the classroom. And it'll slow me down and everybody can keep up a bit easier. And glass casket, like, again, that is a really, you say you're new at this, but that is a really, really good start. Yeah. And if you want any more feedback on that, take another photo of it, try to get a clear photo, and send it to me, and I'll give you whatever feedback you like. And to everybody else who managed to stick through to the end, I appreciate that. And like I say, look for the video on YouTube sometime next week. So there you go. That's goodbye from Tess McFadden, Sergeant Major of the Hello Kitty Brigade. I think that's who this is in the end. All right. All right. And thanks, guys. We'll see you.